What's going on, my friends? Katie here, and welcome back to the 33rd official episode of the King Darius Experience, where our awakening and powering today is coming by way of understanding how to lay a proper infrastructure and a proper foundation for what we want to build. And this is actually coming from a conversation I was having with Joseph via DM over Instagram. And he responded to one of my stories about some of the content that's coming out on sacredworld.com. And he said, "This is awesome, brother. So what is the company structure now? How did you decide to structure it all?" And he goes on to say, "I'm not really sure about the original structure. It's interesting, though, how you are setting it all up." So it kind of brought me to today's episode, not to necessarily communicate, hey, this is how you should do things. This is more so of this is how we're doing things, and this is why we're doing things the way that we're doing it, so you guys can make a decision of whether or not this is beneficial for you. And I'm sorry if you hear some background noise right now. We have a garbage truck passing the building here in the city, so that will probably happen again here in another 60 to 90 seconds. So as I pull up a few of the notes that I jotted down here, I just want you guys to stay in that mindset that you are creating something that is supposed to last decades for you, right? Unless you're specifically building something that you're trying to sell or something that you're trying to, gain leverage or advantage of in a certain industry, and you're going to have other, collective efforts and collective, personas and whatnot involved in what you're doing in the future. You're likely trying to build something that you love so that you have the freedom to continually do the things that you love. So the first point that I want to talk about is why infrastructure matters in the first place. So it's so funny to me, over the years I've had obviously thousands of conversations, from sales phone calls to client calls to media calls, opportunity calls, partner calls, all that kind of stuff. Thousands of conversations, as many people have, that involve themselves in any industry. And one of the commonalities that I see a lot of times is people not spending enough time on strategy and enough time on infrastructure, hopping into the game and then figuring it out, which can be an advantage for somebody who's entrepreneurial by nature. It can be I guess sort of a one up if you can just hop in the game, get something done, and then figure things out later. That's why quotes exist like entrepreneurs jump off a cliff and build an airplane on the way down, because it's the whole process or the position of activating a behavior and then figuring out all the pieces, and not using all of the details in the pieces as an excuse or a reason as to why you're not doing in the first place. However, in my experience, it's a both and thing. It's something that you do in correlation with each other. You not only do as quickly and as fast and as with as much frequency as you can, but you do it with accuracy and on top of a vision and on top of infrastructure that actually means something to you, and that is aligned to a trajectory that makes sense to where you're going, because your infrastructure is essentially like your business resume, right? It's not necessarily how people engage with you all of the time, but when people do have touch points with your brand, it's how they understand you in a simple format. So I wrote down, it's how people find you. It's how people learn about you. It's how people engage with you. It's what people think about when you're not present. It's how people consider you or not consider you for opportunities. It's how you communicate with the world, and it's how you monetize what you love, right? So your entire foundation is how you're presenting yourself or positioning yourself to the rest of the world, to your communities, to the people that will buy from you, to the people who would just consume your content and not necessarily buy for you. And then obviously for the secondary and tertiary audiences that come after that. But your infrastructure is everything, but the caveat or the disclaimer is that it doesn't need built overnight. So one of the things that's really important as you're strategizing or building infrastructure is to realize that you're building one block at a time. And I always make the analogy of how businesses are built and how houses are built and all of that kind of stuff. In regards to it's layered, and there's a ton of different contractors, and they're all doing something different. Somebody's coming in and sort of setting the foundation for the house, and somebody is then coming and laying down all the slabs and the pillars and the connector pieces that need to hold the frame or the foundation of the house. Then somebody's coming in putting up walls and the roof, and then somebody's coming in and do flooring and drywalling and electrical work and plumbing and all of that kind of stuff. And then somebody's coming in actually interior designing the place and filling it with furniture. And then obviously the last step is people come in and they habitate the environment. And even before it got to those steps, somebody had to plan it, somebody had to get the permit, somebody had to blueprint it, all of that kind of stuff. And you have to view your business very similarly, is that there will be a time when and all of it set up, and you're just essentially showing houses, if we're staying within that metaphor. You're just communicating, having conversations with people, sort of evangelizing your thing, but you have to get there, right? You have to set a point on the board and aim towards it and start executing towards it in order for you to even get there. So one of the things that you will find as a easy way for you to begin identifying how to do this is by understanding your specific entrepreneur type. So there's a million different ways you can do this. You can take personality tests, you can, take strengths tests and stuff like that identify the skills you have, the strengths you have, the personality, the communication skills you have. You can go like that traditional route, and there's even more modern versions of that too. But so a lot of that comes down to self-awareness around these three things as it pertains to specifically business and specifically creating around the things that you love. Is A, identify how you communicate, B, identify how you lead, and C, identify how you sell. Because those three things, amongst other things, but those are the three core things that you need to drive growth inside of anything that you're trying to build in the digital spaces. You need to know how to communicate and communicate extremely well. You need to know how to lead, because at some point there's going to be other parties involved, either directly with the fulfillment of the things that you're selling and doing, or with the collaboration on what you're presenting forth, whether it's platforms, apps, content, etc. And then finally, how do you sell, right? What is your style for selling? When does it usually happen? How many touch points does it take? What is the window of opportunity? Where are those people living, right? What form of communication? Is it audio, textual, or visual? So if you figure out those three types of the answer to those three questions, you will start beginning to identify your entrepreneurial type, which will help you understand how to set your foundation. Oh, I usually communicate this type of way, which means I need to be putting forth this style of content, so that way I don't have any barriers to how I'm creating content. Moving on, this is how I interact and lead people. So I need to make sure my infrastructure is set up to where, as I add people into this current foundation, that it's still complementing my style of leadership. And then finally, my business is going to live and die on my ability to intake and successfully fulfill transactions coming into the business. So if I don't build infrastructure around how I specifically sell, then I'm going to fall slave to other people's ways of doing things, and I'm going to be constantly looking up frameworks on how to do stuff, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that's a never ending gap that you don't want to find yourself falling through, is constantly regurgitating or curating how everybody else is doing something. Sometimes you have to sit down and ask yourself hard questions, like we had that episode about creators asking themselves hard questions, so that way you can figure out the answer to some of these things and start building. And then finally, these are the actual foundational pieces that I personally believe that you need to have in order for you to build anything online. And these three foundational pieces are a transaction, a presentation, and communication. So I'm going to say that one more time. In order to grow anything in a digital space, you need a transaction, you need a presentation, and you need communication. How all of that breaks down is essentially your transaction is what is the name on the contract or the dotted line as you sell your product, your service, or whatever it is. You're selling attention, selling advertising. Whose name is on? Who are they doing business with? What's the transaction? Because what you will find a lot of times is that the transaction, the name on the transaction, is not the same name being marketed many times, because when you're setting up infrastructure and you're setting up the legalities around business, you're not really in a marketing and selling mindset, at least most people. So they set up a sort of legal entity, and then they market differently as they, generate their website and engage on social platforms and stuff like that. So you have to have a transactional level of your business, so you understand the nature and how you're doing business. Then you need your presentation. So this comes a lot, in tandem with the conversation around brand positioning, is how are you presenting yourself? How are you talking about what you do? Can I go to one location and essentially figure out who you are, what you do, and how you do it, and then hopefully how much it costs, or at least how to get in contact with you. So who are you, your company, what do you do, what do you stand for, and what do you offer to the world? And then finally, that communication is how are you constantly communicating the now? So even if you set up a foundation, your transaction, even if you set up your presentation, how you're positioning yourself and all of that kind of stuff, and people know who you are, there's still an element, sort of like a daily, weekly, month over month ticker of what's happening in your industry. How are you guys responding to that? How is that working with your customers, your clients, your audiences, your buyer personas, your avatars, all of that kind of stuff? And as long as you have those three elements, those three tools, or those three pieces within your foundation, your infrastructure is going to start being built around the things that you love, because you have identified your foundation, you've identified your presentation, how you're actually communicating to the world, and then you're doing that in a consistent way. So hopefully that gives a little bit of insight, and then I can literally show you, firsthand how that is working for me at Sacred. So if I go to Sacred Media House right now, excuse me, catching a little bit of a cold here. If I go to sacredmediahouse.com, essentially you can learn everything about who we are as a business, right? Sacred Media House is my presentation, if you will. It's my philosophy on marketing, right? So if you go into our philosophy, you're going to see sacred marketing, how we approach it. So that way people who are considering working with us or just wanting to learn more about what we do, they at least understand our unique identifier when it comes to how we approach marketing, so they know who they're working with and how that entity or that brand works. Then it goes into our solution. So obviously we have marketing, advertising, branding, and business development. And then we have that program called Dish Out, where we do unlimited video and audio content for creators, because that's my way of helping attract the type of client that I actually want to work with, is by giving services and offers that are competitive, as it pertains to what's already on the market. Then our story, giving a little bit of background about who I am, who the team is, etc. And then our network, the mouthpiece. So if I actually click into the network, that is going to be a sacred world. So the entire reason for that part of the infrastructure is on Sacred Media House, unless I were to just add a blog section, which I have an entire theory of why I'm not just going to attach a blog to a website. There's no way for people to learn about what's happening right now and how I'm responding to those things, let alone, the team that I have and I'm moving along with, and all that kind of stuff. And how do I organize that information in a categorical way that provides an experience for people? And we talk about that all the time. But then if you don't care necessarily about all of that, right? You're not looking for, marketing work. You're not necessarily looking to consume marketing content. You can literally just go to sacredglobal.com. And this would be more so if I'm at conferences, if I'm talking to a high level opportunity that's not necessarily, followed up by a quick transaction. It's more so of just an open discussion about future opportunities. If I ever go for investments, if I ever go for, any type of loan or working capital or anything like that, this is my sort of global corporate entity of how I just act from a 30,000 foot view. This is everything about the company. It starts off with the company's mission, who we are. It breaks down each individual business unit and activity that I'm working on right now with links to those appropriate places, has a small excerpt about the company alone, and there's also obviously about page on Sacred Media House as well that goes a little bit more in depth. And then it has a simple way at the bottom of the site of getting in contact with us. So this is a very effective way for you to communicate the umbrella that all of your other activities live under. And that's how our infrastructure is currently set up. We have the corporate entity, we have the presentation, which is Sacred Media House, and then we have the mouthpiece, which is a sacred world. And again, I'm not saying any of this to say this is how you should do it. I'm saying this is how we have found it effective, and I've done this, I would say 80 to 90% of this same infrastructure in the other businesses that I've built. And it's always been the best part, or my specific skill when it comes to building brands and businesses, is how I set up my infrastructure usually leads to the type of growth that I want to see inside of a space, a sector, or an industry. So hopefully that helps you and the other people who are curious about infrastructure and building, because a lot of times people just, like we've talked about before, just think, oh, I need to build an empire, and so I need to go big and wide and in the deep as fast as I possibly can. And you can get caught listening to the wrong people and doing the wrong things for a very long time, which ends up being costly in more than one way. You have your actual costs, you have your hidden costs, you have your opportunity costs. So it's affecting you in multiple different angles if you don't figure out how to set your infrastructure up from day one. So hopefully that was helpful to you guys. We will see you in episode 34 of the King Darius Experience. Peace.
Ayy, pulled up at the spot, but you ain't getting it. All these thirsty hoes looking for wedding rings, and all these niggas want something to put it in. Now we got these little babies in the rap game. Yeah, I just started, I'm already taking names. Like I said in gang, we don't play no games. I was done with waiting, so I took my place. Now niggas talk they shit because they think they sway. But in my phase, I sit back like blase, it's chit chat. I got cake, you big mad in the decade, just look bad, shit's bigger than rap. You not considering that, my money thicker than that, my vision clearer than that. Ay, dry like 10,000